The station called Kelvora Prime had floated in the darkness between stars for over 40,000 years. It was older than most civilizations. It was older than memory itself. The great ring of metal and crystal stretched across the void like a crown waiting for a king who would never come. At its heart sat the Grand Convocation Hall, where the Galactic Council had ruled over 1,000 worlds since before humanity had learned to make fire. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the entrance to that ancient hall and tried not to feel small. She was 53 years old. Her hair was gray at the temples, her hands were steady, and her eyes were sharp. She had spent 30 years in diplomatic service, negotiating with corporations, governments, and powers that thought themselves untouchable. But nothing had prepared her for this. The doors before her were 300 meters tall. They were made from a metal that human science could not identify. Strange symbols covered their surface, carved deep into the material in patterns that seemed to shift when she looked away. The symbols meant nothing to the translators. They meant nothing to the council species either. They were just decorations now, remnants of a forgotten age. Elena knew better. She had seen those symbols before. "Ambassador," said Captain Chen, stepping up beside her. He was the commander of their small security detail, 6 soldiers in dress uniforms who looked painfully out of place in this alien monument. "The council has called for the human delegation. We're the last item on the schedule." "Of course we are," Elena said. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "They want us tired. They want us to feel small and rushed. It's the oldest trick in politics." "Will it work?" Elena looked up at those massive doors, at the symbols that nobody else could read. "No," she said, "it won't." The doors opened without sound. Beyond them lay the Grand Convocation Hall, and Elena Vasquez walked into legend. The hall was vast beyond human understanding. The ceiling rose so high that clouds formed near the top, drifting through beams of light that fell from crystal windows. Thousands of platforms floated in the air at different heights, each one holding delegates from different species. The platforms were arranged in a careful hierarchy. The oldest species sat highest, closest to the light. The youngest sat near the floor in shadow. The platform reserved for humanity was the lowest of all. It floated barely 10 meters above the ground, positioned so that every other species could look down upon them. Elena stepped onto the platform without hesitation. Her team followed. The platform hummed beneath their feet and began to rise, carrying them to their assigned position. As they ascended, Elena felt thousands of alien eyes turn toward them. The silence was worse than any insult. She saw the Corvathians first. They were the dominant species of the council, tall and thin with skin like polished bronze, and eyes that burned with cold intelligence. They had ruled the council for 12,000 years. Their platform floated near the very top of the hall, bathed in golden light. Below them sat the hegemony species, the Draxel with their armored shells, the Vorn with their many eyes, the Cathari who communicated through colors that rippled across their skin. These were the great powers of the galaxy. These were the species that had conquered star systems when humans still lived in caves. And below them all, in the shadows, sat humanity. The Corvathian High Speaker rose from his throne. His name was Vorthax, and he had held his position for 600 years. His voice carried across the hall without any visible amplification, filling every corner with cold authority. "The council recognizes the presence of the human delegation," he said. "You may speak." Elena bowed her head in the traditional gesture of respect. "High Speaker, honored members of the council, we thank you for granting us this audience. Humanity comes before you today to petition for associate membership in the Galactic Council. We believe that our species has much to offer and much to learn from the wisdom of the elder races." She paused, waiting for a response. What she got was laughter. It started with the Draxel, a clicking sound that rattled from their shells like stones falling down a cliff. Then the Vorn joined in, their many eyes blinking in patterns that their translators identified as amusement. Soon the entire hall was filled with the sound of alien mockery. Vorthax raised one long hand, and the laughter stopped, but the smile remained on his bronze face. "Associate membership," he said. "How ambitious. Tell me, Ambassador, how old is your species?" Modern humans have existed for approximately 300,000 years, Elena said. 300,000 years. Vorthax let the words hang in the air. The Korvathians were building starships when your ancestors were learning to walk upright. The Draxel had conquered their first star system when your kind still feared fire. And you come to us, children of a single century of space travel, asking to sit among the elder races. We learn quickly, Elena said. You learn destruction, said another voice. This came from the Cathari delegate, whose skin flickered with angry reds and oranges. We have studied your history, human. War after war after war. You butcher your own kind over territory, over resources, over ideas. You are a violent species, barely contained by your own fragile civilization. We have changed, Elena said. Have you? Vorthax leaned forward on his throne. Then explain why your military spending has increased by 40% in the last decade. Explain why you have built warships capable of faster-than-light travel. Explain why you have colonized 12 worlds without council permission. Elena kept her face calm. Those colonies are in unclaimed space. We have violated no treaties. You have violated tradition, Vorthax said. And tradition is the foundation of civilization. Your species does not understand patience. You do not understand respect. You push forward without thought, without wisdom, without any sense of your place in the greater order of things. He stood, and his shadow seemed to fall across the entire hall. The council has already made its decision regarding your petition. Associate membership is denied. Furthermore, the hegemony has lodged a formal claim to the systems you call New Eden, Carthage, and Meridian. You have 60 cycles to withdraw your colonists. Failure to comply will be considered an act of aggression against the Galactic Council. Elena felt her team tense behind her. Captain Chen's hand moved toward his sidearm, then stopped. There was nothing a weapon could do here. High Speaker, Elena said, those colonies contain over 2 million human citizens. You're asking us to abandon them? I am not asking, Vorthax said. I am telling. This is how the galaxy works, child. The strong take what they need. The weak learn their place. Your species has not yet learned its place. Perhaps losing 3 worlds will teach you. The hall erupted in approval. Delegates stamped their feet, clicked their claws, flashed their colors. The message was clear. Humanity was nothing. Humanity would always be nothing. Elena Vasquez stood in the center of that storm of contempt, and she did not move. Her eyes had drifted to the walls of the chamber. The ancient symbols were everywhere, carved into the metal with impossible precision. They were older than the council. They were older than any species present, and Elena could read them. The symbols told a story. They spoke of a time before the council, before the elder races, before any of the powers who now mocked humanity had risen from the mud of their homeworlds. They spoke of the builders, the first ones, the Elvor. Elena had spent 40 years studying those symbols. She had learned them in secret vaults beneath Antarctic ice, where a ship older than human civilization had slept for 50,000 years. She knew what the wall said. She knew what the council had forgotten. The laughter was dying down now. Vorthax was preparing to dismiss them, to send humanity back to their little corner of the galaxy in shame. Elena raised her hand. High Speaker, she said, and her voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk. Before we accept your judgment, I would ask permission to exercise the right of response. Vorthax frowned. The right of response is a formality. It changes nothing. Nevertheless, I claim it. The High Speaker waved his hand in irritation. Very well. Speak your piece, human. It will make no difference. Elena Vasquez looked up at the symbols on the wall. She looked at the arrogant faces of the elder races. She thought about the 2 million humans whose lives hung in the balance, and the billions more who would suffer if she failed here today. Then she opened her mouth and spoke in a language that had not been heard in 50,000 years. The words were strange. They were beautiful. They rolled from her tongue like music, like water, like the first light of creation. They were not human words. They were not Korvathian words. They were older than anything in that hall except the walls themselves, and the walls answered. Light blazed from the ancient symbols. The air hummed with power. Across the grand convocation hall, systems that had slept for millennia began to wake. The platforms trembled. The clouds at the ceiling parted, revealing a dome of crystal that blazed with sudden illumination. The laughter was gone. The mockery was gone. Every alien in that hall was staring at Elena Vasquez with expressions that their translators could not describe. Vorthax had risen from his throne. His bronze face had gone pale. What? What are you doing? What is this? Elena continued speaking. The words flowed from her like a river that had been dammed for generations and was finally breaking free. The walls responded with more light, more text, more ancient messages that pulsed with meaning. When she finally stopped, the silence was absolute. High Speaker, Elena said, her voice steady and calm. I have not spoken in Galactic Common because these halls were not built to hear Galactic Common. I have spoken in the language of those who made this place. I have spoken in the tongue of the Elvor, the builders, the first ones. She smiled, and there was no warmth in it. You call us children. You mock our history and our ambitions. But while you were forgetting your ancestors, we found them. And now perhaps it is time for humanity to remind the galaxy of what it has lost. The Grand Convocation Hall had never been so quiet. In 40,000 years of debates, arguments, and declarations, no species had ever managed to silence every voice at once. Elena Vasquez had done it with a few sentences in a dead language. The light from the walls continued to pulse, soft and steady, like a heartbeat that had started again after centuries of stillness. The ancient symbols glowed with colors that human eyes could barely process. The air itself seemed different now, charged with something old and powerful. Vorthax, High Speaker of the Corvathians, stood frozen on his platform. His bronze face had lost all color. His hands were shaking. For a being who had ruled the council for 600 years, he suddenly looked very small. This is impossible, he whispered, but his voice carried through the silent hall, and everyone heard. The language of the builders was lost. It died with them 50,000 years ago. No one can speak it. No one. Elena clasped her hands behind her back and looked up at him with calm eyes. And yet you heard me speak it, and the walls answered. The Draxel delegate leaned forward, his armored shell clicking with nervous energy. This must be a trick, some human technology designed to deceive us. The builders are myth, legend. They cannot be, Elena spoke again. 3 words in the ancient tongue. The platform beneath the Draxel delegate began to rise, carrying him higher against his will. He scrambled for the controls, but they did not respond. The station itself was obeying Elena's command. She spoke another word, and the platform stopped. Not a trick, she said. Not a deception. The builders were real, honored delegate. They created this station. They created the hyperspace lanes that connect your worlds. They uplifted your ancestors from primitive creatures into the species you are today. She paused. And they left records behind, records that humanity found. The hall exploded into chaos. Delegates were shouting in 100 different languages. Some were calling for guard. Others were demanding explanations. The Cathari delegate's skin was flashing through so many colors that the translators could not keep up. Vorthax raised his hand, and slowly, painfully, order returned. But it was not the confident order of before. It was the fragile order of beings who had just seen their world turn upside down. Explain yourself. Human, Vorthax said. His voice was hard, but Elena could hear the fear beneath it. Where did you learn this language? How do you possess this knowledge? Elena nodded. She had prepared for this moment her entire life. 212 years ago, human scientists discovered something beneath the ice of our southernmost continent. A ship, vast beyond anything we had ever built, made from materials we could not identify. It had been there for 50,000 years, buried under kilometers of ice, waiting. She began to pace slowly on her platform, her footsteps echoing in the terrible silence. At first, we thought it was alien in the way you are alien, strange, foreign, from somewhere else in our galaxy. But as we studied it, we realized the truth. This ship was older than any of your civilizations. It was older than the Council itself. It came from a time when the galaxy was young, when the first intelligent species was taking its first steps among the stars. The Vorn delegate spoke, his many eyes blinking rapidly. The Elvor. You are speaking of the Elvor. Yes, Elena said. The builders. The first ones. The species that created everything you now take for granted. They were not myths. They were not legends. They were real, and they left their knowledge behind for anyone wise enough to find it. She stopped pacing and looked directly at Vortex. Humanity found it. We spent 2 centuries studying their language, their history, their science. We learned in secret because we knew how the galaxy would react. We knew that species who had ruled for millennia would not welcome those who could speak to their gods. Vorthax's eyes narrowed. You admit that you have hidden this knowledge. You admit deception. We admit caution, Elena said. There is a difference. We did not know how the council would respond. We did not know if you would embrace the truth or try to bury it. And now? The Draxel delegate's voice was hard. Now you reveal this secret. Why? What do you want from us? Elena smiled. It was not a threatening smile, but it was not warm either. It was the smile of someone who held all the cards and knew it. What I want, she said, is for you to listen. Really listen, for perhaps the first time in 40,000 years. The Alvar archives contain more than just language. They contain history. They contain science. They contain the true story of how every species in this hall came to be. She pointed to the Korvathians. Your ancestors were tree-dwelling creatures on a world with 2 suns. The builders found them and saw potential. They modified your genetics, enhanced your intelligence, taught you to reach for the stars. She pointed to the Draxel. Your people were burrowing insects, blind and simple. The builders gave you eyes. They gave you minds capable of building civilizations. She pointed to the Vorn, the Cathari, and dozens of other species. All of you, every elder race in this hall. You did not evolve to greatness on your own. You were uplifted. You were created. The builders made you what you are. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of beings confronting a truth they had never wanted to face. Vorthax sat down slowly on his throne. He looked older now, as if the weight of Elena's words had aged him centuries in moments. And humans? Were you also uplifted by these builders? Elena shook her head. No, humanity evolved on its own. The builders visited Earth long ago, but they chose not to interfere. The archives explain why, though that is a story for another time. What matters now is that we found their legacy and we learned from it. Learned what? The question came from a young Korvathian delegate seated far below Vorthax. His voice was curious rather than hostile. Elena turned to face him. We learned their language, we learned their science, some of it at least. We learned their history, and the history of every species they touched. She paused. And we learned why they disappeared. The hall seemed to hold its breath. You have this knowledge? Vorthax asked. You know why the builders vanished? We do. And you will share it with us? Elena looked around the hall at the thousands of faces watching her. Some were angry, some were afraid, some were desperate with hope. These were the rulers of the galaxy, the species who had mocked humanity just minutes ago. Now they were waiting for her answer, like children waiting for a teacher's lesson. We will share everything, Elena said. Every record, every piece of history, every scientific principle. Humanity has no desire to hoard this knowledge. We believe it belongs to all intelligent life. A wave of relief passed through the hall, but Elena raised her hand, and the relief died. However, she said, there is a condition. Vorthax's eyes hardened. Conditions? Of course. What do you demand, human? Power? Territory? A seat on the council? Elena shook her head. Nothing so simple. The Alvor left a message for their children, for all of you. It explains everything. Why they uplifted your ancestors, why they built the hyperspace network, why they disappeared. It is the most important piece of knowledge in the archive. She took a deep breath. My condition is this. Before I share the archives, the council must agree to hear that message. All of it, without interruption, without excuses. You must hear what the builders wanted to tell you, even if it hurts, even if it changes everything you believe about yourselves. That seems a small price, the young Korvathian delegate said. We would be honored to hear the words of the builders. But Vorthax said nothing. His bronze face had gone very still, and Elena could see the calculations happening behind his ancient eyes. He understood what she was really asking. He understood that the message might destroy the very foundations of council authority. "You are asking us to risk everything," he said quietly. "You are asking us to hear words that might tear apart 40,000 years of tradition." Elena met his gaze without flinching. "I am asking you to hear the truth. What you do with it afterward is your choice." The Draxel delegate slammed his claws against his platform. "This is extortion. You cannot hold the knowledge of the builders hostage to your demands." "I am not holding anything hostage," Elena said calmly. "I am offering you a gift." But gifts come with responsibilities. The builders did not leave their knowledge so that it could be buried or twisted. They left it so that their children might learn and grow. If you are not willing to learn, then perhaps you are not ready for what they had to teach. She turned back to Vortex. "You have called humanity children. You have mocked our short history and our violent past. But children grow up, High Speaker. They learn. They change. Humanity has spent 2 centuries learning from the builders. We have changed more in that time than your species has changed in 12,000 years." She spread her hands. "The question is not whether humanity is ready to join the galactic community. The question is whether the galactic community is ready to grow. The builders left you a message 50,000 years ago. They have been waiting for you to hear it. Will you listen? Or will you keep pretending that you have nothing left to learn?" The hall was silent. Every eye was fixed on Vorthax, waiting for his response. The fate of civilizations hung on his answer. Finally, slowly, the High Speaker rose from his throne. "The Council will deliberate," he said. His voice was heavy, tired, nothing like the confident authority of before. "We will give you our answer within 1 cycle." Elena bowed her head. "We will be waiting." As she turned to leave, the young Corvathian delegate called out to her. "Ambassador, 1 question, if you will permit it." Elena paused. "Of course. The builder's message. You have read it. You know what it says." The young delegate's eyes were bright with curiosity. "Did it hurt? Did it change everything you believed?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but it carried through the entire hall. "It broke our hearts," she said, "and then it helped us put ourselves back together. Better than before. That is what the truth does if you let it." She walked off the platform and left the grand convocation hall behind her. The lights in the walls flickered once, then dimmed, returning to their long sleep. But they would not sleep for much longer. The builder's message was waiting, and soon, one way or another, the galaxy would hear it. The human diplomatic vessel, Remembrance, floated in the shadow of Kelvora Prime like a small fish beside a sleeping whale. It was tiny compared to the ancient station, barely a speck against the ring of metal and crystal. But inside that small ship, the fate of human civilization was being decided. Elena Vasquez sat alone in her quarters, staring out the window at the stars. She had not slept in 2 days. She had barely eaten. The weight of what was coming pressed down on her shoulders like the gravity of a dying sun. There was a knock at her door. "Come in," she said without turning. Captain Chen entered, his face tight with worry. "Ambassador, we've intercepted communications from the Hegemony fleet. They've mobilized 40 warships toward our border colonies. The Draxel are claiming that our presence here is an act of aggression." Elena nodded slowly. "They're scared. Scared people do dangerous things. With respect, Ambassador, they have enough firepower to turn our 12 colonies into dust. If they attack—" "They won't attack," Elena said. "Not yet. They want the archive too badly. Violence is their last option, not their first." Chen did not look convinced. "How can you be sure?" Elena finally turned from the window. Her eyes were tired, but there was steel behind them. "Because I've studied them, Captain. All of them. The Corvathians, the Draxel, the Hegemony species. I know their histories better than they know themselves. I know what the builders made them from. And I know what they have become. They are afraid of change, but they are more afraid of being left behind." She stood and walked to her desk, where a holographic display showed the ancient Aelvor symbols. The builders understood this. They knew that knowledge is the greatest power in the universe. Not weapons, not territory, not military strength. Knowledge. And right now, Humanity has knowledge that every species in the galaxy would kill to possess. Chen frowned. That's not exactly comforting, Ambassador. Elena smiled slightly. It's not meant to be comforting. It's meant to be true. We are in a dangerous position, Captain. We hold cards that no one expected us to hold. How we play them will determine whether humanity becomes a great power or a forgotten footnote in galactic history. Before Chen could respond, the ship's communication system crackled to life. Ambassador Vasquez, we're receiving a priority transmission from the station. Multiple delegates are requesting private meetings. Elena exchanged a look with Chen. It begins, she said. Send them the standard acknowledgement. I'll meet with them one at a time. The next 12 hours were exhausting. Delegate after delegate came to the remembrance, each one seeking something different. The Vorn wanted scientific knowledge. They were a species of scholars, and the chance to study Elvor technology was irresistible to them. The Cathari wanted historical records, hoping to understand their true origins. Several smaller species came simply to express support, tired of the hegemony's dominance and hungry for any change in the galactic order. But the most interesting meeting came last. The young Korvathian delegate, who had spoken up in the council chamber, arrived alone, without guards or attendants. His name was Velcora, and he was barely 300 years old, a child by Korvathian standards, but his eyes burned with an intelligence that reminded Elena of the sharpest human mind she had ever known. Ambassador Vasquez, he said, bowing his head in the traditional greeting. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Elena gestured to a seat. Please sit. Can I offer you refreshment? I'm afraid our supplies are limited to human foods and drinks, but I did not come for refreshment, Velcora said. He remained standing, his tall form filling the small meeting room. I came for truth. Elena raised an eyebrow. Truth about what? About everything. Velcora's voice was intense. The High Speaker and the Old Ones. They are terrified of what you know. They have built their entire authority on the myth of Korvathian superiority. They claim that we are the natural leaders of the galaxy, that our long history proves our right to rule. He paused. But you can prove that we were created, just like everyone else, that we are not special, that our entire civilization is built on a lie. Elena studied him carefully. Does that frighten you? Yes, Velcora admitted, but it also excites me. Do you understand what it is like to grow up being told that your species is perfect, that your traditions are sacred and cannot be questioned? It is a prison, Ambassador, a beautiful, comfortable prison, but a prison all the same. He stepped closer, and Elena saw something in his eyes that she recognized. Hope, desperate, hungry hope. The younger generations feel it, Velcora said. We look at the galaxy and see stagnation. We see species repeating the same patterns for thousands of years, never changing, never growing. We ask questions, and we are told that questions are dangerous. We suggest new ideas, and we are told that the old ways are best. He shook his head. I do not want to live in a galaxy that fears change, Ambassador. I want to live in a galaxy that embraces it. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the stars. The builders felt the same way, she said softly. That is why they left. Velcora's breath caught. You know why they disappeared. Truly? Yes. And when the council agrees to hear their message, everyone will know. Elena turned back to face him. But I will tell you this much, because I think you deserve to understand. The builders did not die. They did not fall to some great catastrophe or enemy. They chose to leave. Velcora stared at her. They chose. But why? They had built a galactic civilization. They had created dozens of intelligent species. Why would they abandon all of that? Elena's expression was sad and knowing. Because they realized they had made a mistake. They uplifted your ancestors, gave them intelligence and technology and civilization. But they gave you those things as gifts, not achievements. The species they created never had to struggle for their advancement. They never had to grow on their own. She walked back to her desk and activated a holographic display. The image showed a star map of the galaxy, with the hyperspace lanes glowing like threads of light. Look at this network, Elena said. The builders created it 50,000 years ago. It connects every major system in the galaxy. And in all that time, no species has ever improved upon it. No one has added new routes, developed better technology, or found alternative methods of faster-than-light travel. You use what the builders gave you, exactly as they gave it to you. Velcora was quiet, processing this. You are saying we have stagnated. I am saying you have never had a reason to grow. The builders gave you everything you needed. They made the galaxy comfortable and safe. And comfort and safety, it turns out, are the enemies of progress. Elena deactivated the display and met Velcora's eyes directly. The builders realized this too late. They saw that their children had stopped developing, not just technologically, but culturally, spiritually, in every way that matters. So they made a choice. They decided to leave, to remove themselves from the galaxy entirely, so that their children would finally have to stand on their own. She spread her hands. That is the truth, Velcora. That is what the message will reveal. The builders did not abandon you out of cruelty or indifference. They abandoned you out of love, the same love a parent feels when they finally let their child walk alone. Velcora was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. And humanity? You were not uplifted. You evolved on your own. Yes, that is why you are different. That is why you found the archive when no one else could. You were not given anything. You had to earn everything. Elena nodded slowly. We made every mistake possible. We fought wars, caused extinctions, nearly destroyed our own planet. But we learned from those mistakes. We grew. We changed. That is what the builders hoped their children would eventually do. Learn to grow on their own, without someone holding their hand. Velcora straightened, and something shifted in his expression. The fear was still there, but it was being replaced by something stronger, determination. I want to help, he said. Whatever happens in the council, whatever decision the High Speaker makes, I want to help humanity share this knowledge. The younger generations need to hear it. The galaxy needs to hear it. Elena studied him for a long moment. Then she extended her hand, a human gesture of agreement that Velcora probably did not understand, but somehow he seemed to grasp its meaning. He took her hand and gripped it firmly. The council will give their answer soon, Elena said. When they do, I hope you will stand with us. I will, Velcora promised, whatever the cost. After he left, Elena returned to the window. The stars were cold and distant, but she knew that somewhere out there, the builders were watching. They had waited 50,000 years for their children to be ready. Elena hoped they would not be disappointed. The communication system crackled again. Ambassador, priority message from the station. The council has reached a decision. High Speaker Vorthax requests your presence in the Grand Convocation Hall immediately. Elena took a deep breath. This was it. 200 years of preparation, generations of sacrifice, all leading to this moment. Acknowledge the message, she said. Tell them I'm on my way. As she walked toward the shuttle bay, Captain Chen fell into step beside her. Ambassador, our sensors have detected movement in the hegemony fleet. They're holding position, but they've powered up their weapon systems. Elena did not break stride. They're trying to intimidate us. They want me to walk into that hall afraid. Are you afraid? Elena smiled. A real smile this time, warm and confident. Captain, I'm about to tell the most powerful species in the galaxy that everything they believe about themselves is wrong. I'm about to shatter 40,000 years of tradition with a single message from their gods. She paused at the shuttle door. Afraid? No. I'm exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what I was born to do. She stepped into the shuttle and left the remembrance behind. The galaxy was about to change forever. The Grand Convocation Hall was different now. When Elena Vasquez had first entered it 2 days ago, only the council delegates had been present. 47 species sitting in their assigned positions, arranged by age and power. Now the hall was filled beyond capacity. Word had spread across the galaxy, carried by ships and signals and whispered communications. Representatives from hundreds of species had come to witness what was about to happen. They crowded onto platforms that had been empty for millennia. They filled every available space in the ancient chamber. All of them wanted to hear the message of the builders. Elena walked to the human platform, which had been raised from its shameful position near the floor. It now floated at the center of the hall, level with the great powers. This small change told her everything she needed to know about the council's decision. Vorthax stood on his platform, looking down at her. The High Speaker had aged visibly since their last meeting. His bronze skin had lost its shine, and his eyes were heavy with exhaustion. He had spent the last cycle arguing with the other council members, fighting battles that he had ultimately lost. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, and his voice echoed through the silent hall, "the Galactic Council has deliberated on your condition. After much discussion, we have decided to accept." A wave of murmuring passed through the assembled species. Elena bowed her head in acknowledgement. "The Council agrees to hear the message of the Elvor," Vorthax continued. "All of it, without interruption. In exchange, humanity will share the full contents of the archive with all species who wish to study it." "Agreed," Elena said. Vorthax sat down heavily on his throne. For a moment he looked like nothing more than a tired old man who had lost a fight he had been winning for 6 centuries. "Then let us hear what the builders had to say to their children." Elena nodded and reached into her robes. She withdrew a small device no larger than her palm. It was made from the same strange metal as the Elvor ship, covered in the same ancient symbols. When she activated it, the device rose from her hand and floated to the center of the hall. "This is a recording made 50,000 years ago," Elena said. "It was created by the last speaker of the Elvor, in the final days before they departed the galaxy. The archive contained thousands of records, scientific, historical, cultural, but this message was marked as the most important. It was meant to be heard when the time was right." She paused and looked around the hall at the thousands of faces watching her. Alien faces, strange and beautiful. All of them waiting with desperate hope or terrible fear. "The builders called this message their testament," Elena said. "It is their final gift to their children. I will translate it as I play it, so that all may understand." The device pulsed with light, and suddenly the air was filled with holographic images. A figure appeared, tall and graceful, with features that seemed to combine elements of every species in the hall. The Elvor, the builders, the first ones. Seeing them made real was like watching a god step down from heaven. The figure began to speak in the ancient language, and Elena translated in real time. "Children of our hearts," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 50,000 years. "If you are hearing this message, then we have been gone for a very long time. We hope that in our absence you have grown. We hope that you have learned. We hope that you have become everything we dreamed you could be." The holographic figure gestured and images appeared around it. Images of primitive creatures being touched by Elvor technology, their minds expanding, their bodies changing. The uplifting of the elder races shown in beautiful detail. "Long ago, we found you scattered across the stars. You were simple creatures then, bound by instinct and survival. But we saw something in you, a spark of potential, a capacity for greatness. We chose to nurture that spark. We gave you intelligence. We gave you language. We gave you the tools to build civilizations." The images shifted, showing the construction of the hyperspace network, the building of stations like Kelvora Prime, the creation of technologies that the galaxy still depended upon. "We gave you everything we had. We built roads between your worlds. We created places where you could meet and learn and grow together. We watched you take your first steps into the cosmos, and we were proud." Then the tone of the message changed. The holographic figure's expression became sad, and the images darkened. "But we made a mistake. In our love for you, we gave you too much. We solved your problems before you could solve them yourselves. We removed obstacles before you could learn to overcome them. We made your lives comfortable and safe, and in doing so, we took away the very challenges that would have made you strong." Elena's voice cracked slightly as she continued translating, but she pushed through. "We watched you for thousands of years, and we saw what we had done. Your species had stopped growing. Your civilizations had stopped changing. You repeated the same patterns, generation after generation, century after century, because you had never needed to do anything else. The gifts we gave you had become chains that bound you to a single path." The holographic figure spread its hands in a gesture of sorrow. "We realized that we had failed you, not through cruelty, not through neglect, but through love that had become smothering. A parent who carries their child everywhere will have a child who never learns to walk. A teacher who gives all the answers will have students who never learn to think. We had done this to you, our children, and we did not know how to undo it. Elena paused. The hall was completely silent. Thousands of beings were staring at the holographic figure with expressions of shock, grief, and dawning understanding. So we made a choice, the hardest choice any parent can make. We decided to leave. The images showed Elvor ships departing from stations, flying toward the edges of the galaxy, disappearing into the void between stars. We removed ourselves from your lives. We took away the safety we had provided, the guidance we had offered, the protection we had guaranteed. We left you alone in the galaxy, not because we stopped loving you, but because our love was the very thing holding you back. The holographic figure looked directly out from the recording, and Elena felt as though those ancient eyes were looking straight into her soul. We knew this would be hard. We knew you would struggle. We knew there would be conflict and pain and loss. But we also knew that these things are necessary. Growth requires challenge. Strength requires resistance. Wisdom requires failure. The most precious lessons cannot be taught. They must be learned. The images shifted one final time, showing a vision of the galaxy as the builders had dreamed it could be. Species working together without hierarchy. Knowledge shared freely. Civilizations building on the achievements of their ancestors, reaching heights that even the Alvor had never imagined. We left this message for the day when you would be ready to hear it. We do not know when that day will come. Perhaps it has already been thousands of years. Perhaps it has been much longer. But whenever you hear these words, know that we never stopped watching. We never stopped hoping. We never stopped believing in what you could become. The figure raised its hands and the symbols on the walls of the hall began to glow in response. You are not children anymore. You have never been children, except in our foolish, loving eyes. You are intelligent beings, capable of charting your own course through the cosmos. The gifts we gave you were meant to be foundations, not cages. Build upon them, improve them, surpass them. That is what we always wanted for you. The holographic figure began to fade, but its final words rang through the hall like a bell. We leave you not as rulers, but as gardeners. The seeds have been planted. The soil has been prepared. Now it is your turn to grow. Grow beyond us, children. Grow beyond anything we could have imagined. And when you finally reach the heights that we could only dream of, know that wherever we are, we will be watching. We will be proud. The figure vanished. The device fell silent. And the Grand Convocation Hall remained frozen in absolute stillness. Elena looked around at the faces of the galaxy's rulers. The Draxel delegate was trembling, his armored shell clicking in a rhythm that the translators identified as deep grief. The Vorn delegate's many eyes were closed, his body shaking with silent emotion. The Cathari delegate's skin was cycling through colors so slowly that it seemed almost still, a sign, Elena knew, of profound thought. And Vorthax, the high speaker of the Korvathians, was weeping. Tears flowed down his bronze face without shame, without attempt at concealment. His hands gripped the arms of his throne so tightly that the metal was bending. Everything he had believed about himself, about his species, about his right to rule, all of it had been stripped away in a few minutes. Elena felt her own eyes burning with tears, but she held them back. There would be time for grief later. Right now she had a duty to fulfill. "High Speaker," she said softly, "the message is complete." Vorthax did not respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was broken, barely recognizable. "Why? Why did you share this with us? You could have used this knowledge to destroy us. You could have kept it secret and built an empire on its foundation. Why give it away?" Elena thought of the 2 centuries that humanity had spent studying the archive. She thought of the philosophers and scientists who had debated what to do with the knowledge. She thought of the leaders who had argued for secrecy, for power, for using the builders' gifts to achieve dominance, and she thought of the decision they had ultimately made. "Because we read the whole message," she said, "we understood what the builders were trying to teach. Knowledge is not power when it is hoarded. Knowledge is power when it is shared. The builders gave us this gift not so that we could rule, but so that we could help everyone grow. She looked around the hall at the thousands of species watching her. Humanity has made terrible mistakes in our history. We have waged wars, destroyed environments, caused suffering beyond measure. But we learned from those mistakes. We grew. We changed. The builder's message showed us that this is the purpose of existence, not to achieve perfection, but to keep growing, keep learning, keep becoming better than we were before. Elena spread her hands, encompassing the entire hall in her gesture. The galaxy has been stagnant for 40,000 years. The builders saw this coming and tried to prevent it by leaving. But their departure alone was not enough. Their children needed to understand why they left. They needed to hear the message. She lowered her hands. Now you have heard it. What you do with it is your choice. The builders did not want to rule your future, and neither does humanity. We only want to help you grow. The silence stretched on. Then slowly a sound began to build. It started with the younger delegates, the ones like Velcora, who had been hungry for change. They began to stamp their feet, to click their claws, to flash their colors in patterns of agreement and hope. The sound spread, growing louder, until the entire hall was filled with the thunder of species who had just discovered that they were free. Free from the myths they had built around the builders. Free from the hierarchies they had maintained for millennia. Free to grow, at last, into whatever they chose to become. Elena Vasquez stood at the center of the storm, watching the galaxy begin to change. And somewhere, in the darkness between stars, she hoped the builders were watching too. 6 months had passed since the message of the builders echoed through the Grand Convocation Hall. In that time, the galaxy had changed more than it had changed in the previous 40,000 years. The Galactic Council had dissolved. There was no vote, no formal declaration, no moment of ending. It simply became irrelevant. The old hierarchy, based on age and tradition and claims of superiority, had crumbled the moment the species of the galaxy learned the truth about their origins. How could the Korvathians claim the right to rule when they had been uplifted from tree-dwelling creatures, just like everyone else? How could the Draxel demand tribute when their entire civilization was built on gifts they had never earned? The answer was simple. They could not. In place of the council, something new was emerging. Species that had been rivals for centuries were reaching out to each other. Borders that had been defended with fleets of warships were opening. Trade routes that had been controlled by the powerful were becoming accessible to everyone. The change was messy and chaotic and sometimes violent, but it was also beautiful. The galaxy was waking up. Elena Vasquez stood on a balcony overlooking the Grand Convocation Hall, watching the transformation unfold. The massive chamber that had once been reserved for council business was being rebuilt. Walls were coming down, platforms were being reorganized. The ancient symbols of the Oilvor had been cleaned and illuminated, their meanings now studied rather than ignored. The hall was becoming a university. Captain Chen walked up beside her, his uniform exchanged for civilian clothes. He had retired from military service 2 months ago, choosing to stay on Kelvora Prime as part of the human delegation that was helping manage the transition. Hard to believe, he said, looking down at the construction crews. 6 months ago, they wanted to take our colonies. Now they're asking us to help them build schools. Elena smiled. Fear and pride made them cruel. Knowledge and hope made them humble. That is the lesson the builders tried to teach. Do you think it will last? The peace? The cooperation? Elena considered the question carefully. No, she said finally. There will be setbacks. There will be conflicts. Old hatreds will surface, and new problems will emerge. Growth is never a straight line. She turned to face him directly. But the direction has changed. For 40,000 years, the galaxy has been walking in circles, repeating the same patterns because they had no reason to change. Now they have a reason. They have seen what stagnation costs, and they have glimpsed what growth could bring. Some will fall back into old habits, but many will keep pushing forward. That is how change happens. Not all at once, but slowly, steadily, one step at a time. Chen nodded thoughtfully. The builders would be proud. I hope so. We will not know until we catch up to them. Elena's eyes grew distant. That is the next goal, you know. Humanity has already begun planning. The builders departed the galaxy 50,000 years ago, but they did not destroy themselves. They went somewhere. Someday we intend to find them. Before Chen could respond, a young voice called out from below. Ambassador Vasquez, Ambassador. Elena looked down and saw Velcora climbing the stairs toward the balcony. The young Corvathian had become one of the most important figures in the new galactic order. He had been among the first to publicly support the sharing of the archive, and his speeches about the need for change had inspired millions across hundreds of worlds. The old guard hated him for it, but the younger generations loved him. He reached the balcony, slightly out of breath. Ambassador, I have news. The hegemony fleet has officially stood down. Their war faction has been dissolved. Elena felt something unclench in her chest. The hegemony had been the biggest threat to the transition. Their fleet had remained mobilized for months, a silent threat hanging over every negotiation. If they had chosen to fight, what happened? She asked. Velcora's skin flickered with colors of satisfaction. Their younger officers refused to follow orders. They had studied the archive. They had read the builder's message. When their commanders ordered them to prepare for invasion, they simply did not comply. The war faction collapsed from within. Chen let out a low whistle. The power of ideas. The power of truth, Velcora corrected. The builders were right. Knowledge that is shared becomes stronger than any weapon. The hegemony built their fleet to control the galaxy through force, but they could not control what their own people learned. Elena placed a hand on Velcora's shoulder. You should be proud. Your speeches helped make this possible. The young Corvathian shook his head. No, you made this possible, Ambassador. Humanity made this possible. You kept the archive secret for 2 centuries, and then you gave it away freely. Do you understand how remarkable that is? Any other species would have used it for conquest. We would have built an empire on that knowledge. But you chose to share it. Elena was quiet for a moment, remembering the debates that had raged on Earth for generations. Not everyone had wanted to share. There had been powerful voices arguing for secrecy, for dominance, for using the builder's gifts to achieve the supremacy that humanity had always dreamed of. The decision to share had not been easy or unanimous. We almost did not, she admitted. There were many who wanted to keep the knowledge for ourselves. They saw it as our chance to become the rulers of the galaxy. What changed their minds? Elena smiled sadly. The message. We read it so many times, studying every word, trying to understand what the builders truly meant. And eventually we realized something important. The builders had given us this knowledge not as a weapon, but as a test. She turned to look out over the hall below, where species that had been enemies were now working together. They wanted to see what we would do with it. Would we hoard it, like the Council had hoarded power? Would we use it to dominate, like the hegemony had dominated? Or would we share it? Would we teach it? Would we use it to help everyone grow? She looked back at Velcora. We decided that if we wanted to be worthy of the builder's legacy, we had to choose the harder path. Conquest would have been easy. Teaching is much more difficult, but teaching is what the builders wanted their children to learn. Velcora was silent for a long moment, processing this. Then he bowed his head in a gesture of deep respect, not the formal bow of diplomacy, but something more personal. Thank you, Ambassador, for everything. Elena returned the bow. Thank you, Velcora, for being willing to listen. The young Corvathian departed, leaving Elena and Chen alone on the balcony. Below them, the construction continued. Human engineers worked alongside Draxel builders, Vorn scholars, Cathari artists. The university was taking shape, a monument to the change that had swept through the galaxy. What happens now? Chen asked. Elena laughed softly. Now we do the hard part. We help them build. We help them learn. We help them grow. It will take generations, maybe centuries. But eventually, the galaxy will catch up to where the builders hoped we would be. She paused. And then perhaps we will go find them. We will show them what their children have become. We will tell them that their sacrifice was not in vain, that their departure taught us what we needed to learn. Chen raised an eyebrow. You think they're still out there? After 50,000 years? I think they are patient, Elena said. I think they have been waiting a very long time, and I think they will wait as long as it takes. Below them, a new shift of workers was arriving. Elena watched as a young Korvathian student approached a human professor, her face eager with curiosity. The professor smiled and began to speak, and even from this distance, Elena could see that he was teaching her something important. The student asked a question. The professor answered, and slowly, carefully, the student began to repeat the words he was teaching her. They were Elvor words, the language of the builders. The tongue that had been silent for 50,000 years was being spoken again, passed from human to alien and from alien to human. Elena watched them for a long time, feeling something warm settle in her heart. The builders had left the galaxy hoping that their children would grow. They had waited 50,000 years to see if it would happen. She hoped they were watching now. She hoped they could see the university rising from the ruins of the council chamber. She hoped they could hear their language being spoken by species that had long forgotten their origins. And she hoped, more than anything, that they were proud. The student finished her lesson and bowed to her teacher. Then she turned and walked away, her lips still moving silently as she practiced the words she had learned. The first word the builders had taught humanity was a greeting. It meant fellow traveler. It was the word they had used when they first met the primitive species that would become the elder races. It was the word they had recorded as the very first symbol in their archive. Now that word was spreading across the galaxy, passed from teacher to student, from species to species, from world to world. It was such a small thing, just a word, but it carried the weight of everything the builders had hoped for. Fellow travelers, not rulers and subjects, not masters and servants. Fellow travelers, walking the same path through the cosmos, learning and growing and becoming more than they had been before. Elena Vasquez stood on the balcony of the Grand Convocation Hall and watched the future being built, one lesson at a time. The galaxy had mocked humanity once. They had called humans children, primitives, violent creatures barely worthy of attention. They had tried to push humanity back into the shadows, back to the margins of the galactic community. But humanity had not stayed in the shadows. They had spoken the forgotten language of the builders, and the galaxy had listened. They had shared knowledge that could have made them emperors. And in doing so, they had become something far more important. They had become teachers. And across the galaxy, for the first time in 50,000 years, the children of the builders were finally beginning to grow. The Alvor inscription on the wall of the hall glowed softly in the light of distant stars. It had been translated now, its meaning shared with every species who cared to know. We leave you not as rulers, but as gardeners. Grow well, children. Grow beyond us. Humanity had found that message beneath Antarctic ice. They had spent 2 centuries learning its meaning, and now at last they were helping the galaxy understand what the builders had always known. The greatest power is not the power to destroy. The greatest power is the power to teach. And humanity, the species that had crawled from the mud of a single small planet, the species that had been mocked and dismissed and underestimated by every elder race in the galaxy, had finally learned what power was truly for, not for conquest, not for dominance, for helping others grow. The builders had waited 50,000 years for their children to understand this lesson. They had sacrificed everything, their homes, their presence, their very existence in the galaxy, to give their children the chance to learn. And now at last their patience had been rewarded. The galaxy was growing again, and somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, Elena hoped the builders were smiling.